Put yourself in position to win big on Kentucky Derby Day with the power of daily racing form. Visit shop.drf.com and get past performances, expert picks, betting strategies, clock reports, and more. Again, that's shop.drf.com.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brad Free with David Aragona. This is Derby Watch, and we had one defection since last week. Not really a surprise that Blazing Sevens came out, but David, talk about the one defection from the list and the one addition and the significance of those two minor changes.
Yeah, we've got a list of runners that are waiting to get into the race if there are more defections. The only lucky one so far has been Jace's Road, who does secure that spot in the field with Blazing Sevens connections announcing that he will not point towards the Kentucky Derby. So that did open up the spot for Jace's Road. I've got him at a big price on my early line, 50-1. He is expected to be a long shot in this race. But the field has otherwise pretty much stayed set. I really haven't tinkered with the odds too much. I will say I have Forte at 3-1 right now. The more that I pay attention to the sentiment out there and the way that things could play, especially with the reaction to Rich Strike winning the Derby last year, I won't be surprised if there's not as large a spread as you see here from a 3-1 up to 50-1. I think Forte could go off a higher price than that. So I'll be interested to see how this Derby is actually bet.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. I mean, 3-1 is a reasonable price right now, but this Derby field appears to be evenly matched. And I know we often say that every year, but this year it really does look evenly matched. And I think Forte, Tapit Trice, Angel of Empire, the three logical North American-based 3-year-olds, they're going to be pretty close to one another as far as price goes. And I'm sure that those odds will be tinkered with after the post-position draw on Monday. So there's a look at the 20 that we expect as of today. Will there be a defection? Well, we'll find out. And if there is one, we know who's first in line. Let's take a look at the on the bubble horses. And the first one in, if there is a defection, is a horse I'd really like to see run, because I think that he's crying for 1 1/4 miles. And he ran very well, finishing third in the Santa Anita Derby. I'm referring to Skinner. He has trained great since finishing third in the Santa Anita Derby. I thought he ran better than Practical Move and Mandarin Hero. Cyclone Mischief, Major Dude, Mandarin Hero, runner-up in the Santa Anita Derby, and King Russell. Those are the 5 that are kind of on the bubble. Churchill Downs allows up to 24 entrants, 20 in the body of the Kentucky Derby, 4 on the also eligible list. As far as Skinner goes, if he doesn't draw into the body of the race in the next few days or so, I'm not convinced that John Sheriffs wants to send a horse all the way across the country for a race that he might not even be able to run in, referring to Skinner. So we'll see if Skinner gets in, and it will take a defection in the next few days for him to do so. I hope he does. Cyclone Mischief, Major Dude, Mandarin Hero, and King Russell on the bubble, literally on the bubble this year. Just a quick side note before we go into some handicapping discussion. I was looking back on the very first Derby Watch in early February that we did. And although I expected, David, I'm sure you did too, there would be some changes in the top 20. I was quite surprised to learn that from the original top 20 list of Derby Watch runners, only 5 of them are still on the list: Forte, Reincarnate, Verifying, Practical Move, and Tapit Trice. So there has been a lot of change. Would you expect there to be that much change, David, looking back over the last couple months, or is this kind of what you expected?
I mean, I think it makes some sense. We did have some horses, especially some of the West Coast horses, fall by the wayside due to injury or just being taken off the Kentucky Derby trail. Some horses that had 2-year-old form from last year, aside from Forte, didn't really take that step forward to their 3-year-old seasons. And we did have some runners that are lightly raced make some late pushes to get into the Kentucky Derby. So I'm not that surprised to hear that. I'm a little maybe surprised that it's as that high, 15 additions since that first list came out. But I'm not surprised that there's been some changes.
Well, Forte still ranks right up near the top of the list. So since this is the final Derby Watch segment of 2023, and it's a little too soon yet to finalize our top selections, we're going to talk briefly, David and I, about some of the uncertainties that we hope to get resolved before next week when our selections are due. And we're going to start off talking a little bit about pace. This is a subject that we initially discussed back in March. And I'm still uncertain who is going to make the lead. But as we get closer and closer to the Derby, it seems likely, in my opinion, that the Derby will unfold at a legitimate pace. These horses are listed in a very subjective order. These are the horses that I would expect to be on or near the front end, including Reincarnate. Now, I know that Reincarnate wasn't close to the lead in his last 2 starts, but he was 3 starts back. And over the last 10 years, no jockey in this country has been more cognizant of the importance of speed in the Kentucky Derby than John Velasquez. In fact, over the last 10 years, he has ridden 8 horses that have been forwardly placed in the Kentucky Derby, and he has won 3 of the last 6, including Medina Spirit, wire to wire 2 years ago, Authentic, wire to wire in September 2020, wire to wire in the Derby. And in 2017, Velasquez rode Always Dreaming to a pace pressing win. He was no farther off the pace than second. My point is this: Velasquez recognizes what it is required to win the Kentucky Derby. In recent years, it has been forwardly placed horses. Mage would be my second preference as a potential pace setter. He went wire to wire going 7 furlongs first time out, and then he had gait issues his next 2 starts around 2 turns. David, I'm just curious regarding your take on Mage as a potential pace setter. He's going to be ridden by Javier Castellano. Is it possible that Mage makes the lead? We know he has speed.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out. I will say I agree with the top horse on your list. I think Reincarnate, that's a good peg by you with John Velasquez aboard, that he's likely to get an aggressive ride. I think that's really the only chance that Reincarnate has in the race to be forward early. And aside from that, it just seems so wide open. The pace scenario seems so murky. I mean, with Mage, as you said, it really does depend on the break. But even aside from the break, it just seems like he's lost a lot of the early speed that he possessed in that debut effort. And I wonder if he's just a horse that's kind of changed over time. So I wonder if he's still quick enough to be forwardly placed in this race. And I mean, there are some others on this list that I understand why you're highlighting them as potential pace horses, but it seems very uncertain if they're going to get forward rides. I mean, we didn't even put Practical Move on this list, but I think he's a horse that I would expect to be forward, not on the lead per se, but probably in that second flight of runners pressing the pace. Who knows what we're going to get from a horse like Wild on Ice, who is a long shot in this race. Most people don't expect him to be around at the finish, but he's shown some forwardly placed intention in some prior starts. So seems very murky beyond, I would say, Reincarnate as to who else is going to go in this race.
Yeah, that's a good call with regards to Practical Move. I actually toyed with the idea of including him on this list of 8 and ended up not doing it at all. But Dermot Sotogake and who else? What I'm talking about? Kingsbarns. They both raced gate to wire. They're not real true front runners. They found themselves on the lead in their respective prep wins, and they were gone. And then Rocket Can with Blinkers On, Jason's Road, Verified, and Confidence Game. They all have some degree of speed. There's no real true, genuine speedball in this field. I think a lot's going to depend on where they draw and, of course, how they break. So I guess a long-winded way, David, of saying that regardless of who you like, I think that this Derby should unfold at a legitimate pace. It's not going to be 45 and change like last year, but would you agree that the pace scenario should be reasonable for everybody to have a chance?
Yeah, I think when there's the perception out there that there's not a clear front runner, a lot of connections might get it in their heads that they're the ones that can send from the gate and potentially get that Medina Spirit type trip that we saw 2 years ago. So I won't be surprised if it gets a little bit heated up front, but just given the uncertainty, when I'm doing my handicapping of this Kentucky Derby, I'm not going to worry too much about a horse getting a specific kind of trip because it seems like there's so much left to be determined with that in that front.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm on the same page as you as far as that goes. I'm just going to assume that the race is going to unfold fairly and that everybody will have a chance. Okay, pace is one of those factors that, you're wrong probably more often than you're right. But there are several other uncertainties with regards to this year's Kentucky Derby field that I want to talk about. And let's start off talking about the Santa Anita Derby. I should have a really good feel for this race because I'm based in Southern California. However, Practical Move's 100 back-to-back 100 buyer speed figures, the only horse in the Derby field right now with back-to-back 100 buyers. Let's look at the Santa Anita Derby. That's Practical Move on the lead. Mandarin Hero is going to swing out in between horses, and Skinner on the outside. And they're going to come to the wire together. Now, 100 buyer speed figure aside, here's what I'm uncomfortable with in the Santa Anita Derby. Generally speaking, when you have multiple horses together at the wire in a dirt race, the race comes back relatively low rated. So if you take Practical Move's 100 buyer at face value, then don't you have to say that, well, Mandarin Hero, who finished, photo finish back, he's the second fastest three-year-old in the country. And I have a hard time making that leap. And also with Skinner. I mean, so far he's a maiden winner who placed in a graded stake prior to his close third in the Santa Anita Derby. So I could probably be accused of being a hypocrite because I like Skinner as a potential Kentucky Derby upsetter if he gets into the field. But I'm just uncomfortable with the highly rated 100 buyer speed figure. And by the way, I do my own homemade speed figures and gave the Santa Anita Derby a number similar to buyer. So I'm not criticizing the figure. I'm just wondering, how could three horses all run so fast in one race and finish together on the wire? So David, maybe you can give me some advice on whether to just accept that number at face value or whether there's just a little bit of skepticism involved in that number.
Yeah, I'll make a couple points about this. I mean, they ran a lot of dirt races that day at Santa Anita, so it doesn't seem like there's a lot of evidence that the track changed for this race. I mean, it seems like it's fairly consistent. So from that perspective, you could have some confidence in the number. But I do understand what you're saying about it seeming a little high for some horses in that race, particularly a horse who finished a little further back in the pack, a Sunland-based runner named One in Vermilion, who I think only lost the race by about 5 lengths and got a speed figure that was so much higher than he had run in any prior start. So that calls into question the number a little bit. And I saw somebody on social media pointing out something that I hadn't really considered with regard to Practical Move, Brad, just kind of an odd way that this has worked out. If Skinner doesn't make it into the race, Practical Move will have never raced against anybody else in this Kentucky Derby field before. I just think that speaks to the fact of how few West Coast horse-based horses actually made it to the Kentucky Derby this year. So we don't really have too many horses aside from Skinner to compare Practical Move to at his prior running lines.
Yeah, that's a good point. He is the fastest horse in the race coming into the Derby, talking about Practical Move. I'm just not convinced that he is a true triple-digit type of colt, even though he's done it twice in a row. Maybe my skepticism is showing through, but I'm just not quite convinced with regards to the Santa Anita Derby and three horses together on the wire. Okay, another race that we need to discuss is the horse that's coming into the race with the highest buyer speed figure of all, and that's Two Phils, who earned a 101 buyer speed figure in the Jeff Ruby Stakes. That's the highest number by any horse in the race. The problem should be clear. It was on a synthetic surface. Now, we talked about Two Phils before the Jeff Ruby, David, and we thought that he made a premature move in both the Lecomte and the Risen Star, and we respected his chances moving to synthetic. But boy, did he take a giant step forward on synthetic. So I guess the question is he a synthetic specialist, or is he just now getting good at the right time? And we should, like Practical Move, maybe we should just accept that 101 at face value and just be done with it and give him a big chance. What's your take on Two Phils and a 101 synthetic surface buyer?
It's a really hard question to answer whether he can transfer that form to the dirt course at Churchill Downs. I will say that even though that was a big jump up from his prior buyers in the high 80s, I know we both had felt that he had run a little bit better than those results might have indicated in both the Lecomte and the Risen Star, making some early moves into races that fell apart. So maybe he was a little underrated coming into that Jeff Ruby Stakes. And you might be tempted to say that now he's overrated coming off that 101 buyer. But Brad, I don't see anybody talking about Two Phils like he's one of the favorites in this race. I think he's going going to be somewhere in that 15 to 20 to 1 range. So if you think that's a fair price on a horse coming in with the fastest last out buyer in the field, I'm not going to talk anybody off Two Phil's. He has a nice running style for this race, the versatility to be in that second or third flight of runners and make that early move to be in position, contention at the top of the stretch. So there are some things to like about Two Phil's. I just think it's one of those situations where you do want to let price be the guide.
Well, that's always the ultimate deciding factor as far as I'm concerned, is price. And when the top figure horse in a race starts at double-digit odds, that certainly piques my interest. I'm going to, for now, assume that this is just a horse that's getting good at the right time. And by the way, the Jeff Ruby Stakes has produced 2 of the past 11 Kentucky Derby winners, Animal Kingdom in 2011 and, of course, Rich Strike last year. The difference between those 2 horses, Animal Kingdom and Rich Strike, and Two Phil's, is that Animal Kingdom was not yet a fast horse going into the Derby, nor was Rich Strike. Two Phil's already is fast by that 101 buyer speed figure. I'm just not sure whether he can reproduce that number on dirt. If he does, he should hit the trifecta at very least. Okay, you're right. Nobody's talking about Two Phil's, but people are talking about the Japanese colt Derma Sotogake, especially after a solid workout on Wednesday morning at Churchill Downs. Let's go ahead and take a look at the replay of the UAE Derby and watch how decisive Derma Sotogake was in victory. He made the lead, he coasted along, and he was long gone. And this was a powerful, powerful win in very fast, raw final time. The dilemma for handicappers is this: there have been 18 horses run in the Kentucky Derby after prepping in Dubai, including 12 of them who won the UAE Derby. Not a single one of those 18 have so much hit the board in the Kentucky Derby. However, I would argue that of those 18, how many of them really had a chance? Because only one of them started at single-digit odds. That was Mendelssohn in 2018, and he was eased in the Kentucky Derby. So I guess what I'm saying is this: Derma Sotogake, I believe, is going to be single-digit price. Would you agree with that, David?
Yeah, I got him 6-1 on the current line. Maybe that's a bit aggressive, but I think he's going to take money in this race.
I think he will too. And so I guess my point is this: Derma Sotogake, along with Mendelssohn, are really the only 2 Dubai to Kentucky shippers who actually, figured as strong contenders. I think we have to respect Derma Sotogake's impressive win in the United Arab Emirates and his subsequent workouts at Churchill Downs. David, I know that you respect Derma Sotogake. What would you like to add with regards to this horse that's trying to break the Dubai to Kentucky curse?
Yeah, I think my opinion is really hardening around the idea that this is a really good horse and he stacks up very favorably with the rest of this field. The real questions, as you outlined, are overcoming that negative history with regard to the UAE Derby and also what you really think is a fair price on him, weighing all of those factors. I will say I like and appreciate his versatility. If you watch his prior Japanese races, he's not a front runner. He comes from off the pace. He's willing to pass horses. Just seems like a horse that can win a race like the Kentucky Derby in multiple ways. Maybe, whereas that wasn't the case with a horse like Mendelssohn a few years ago, he needed a certain kind of trip that he just didn't get after getting pinballed around at the start. So I think Derma Sotogake is a legitimate contender in this race, and I'll be very interested to see how the betting shakes out. If he's 6-1, it's probably not great value on him. If he's 10-1, I'd be very interested in him. So it's one of those horses, like you said, price matters on every horse in this race. But with this one, I think it's really hard to peg how the public is going to assess him. But I like everything that I'm seeing, the vibes around this horse. So as of now, I'm expecting him to run well.
Yeah, I agree. As of Wednesday morning, 10 days out from the Kentucky Derby, I think the Derma Sotogake is a serious contender, arguably the best Dubai to Kentucky shipper that we have ever seen. Okay, let's wrap this up and talk about a couple of lightly raced horses coming into this race. They're both coming in off good, solid prep races, but they've started only 3 times, and I'm referring to Mage and Kings Barnes. Let's take a look at their past performances. And look, they're 3-start colts. They're getting better. That much we know. I guess the question is, what about the challenge facing lightly raced horses? And can a horse be competitive in the Kentucky Derby, having started 3 times or fewer? Last year, Taba tried to be competitive in the 3rd start of his career. It was way too much to ask. But if you go back a little bit in the history books, Curlin in 2007, he finished 3rd in the Kentucky Derby. He was entering off a 105 buyer. In 2008, Big Brown entered the Kentucky Derby off back-to-back 106s, and he won the Derby. And of course, in 2018, Justify, 3 consecutive triple-digit buyers going into the Kentucky Derby, and he won the Triple Crown. So it's not unprecedented for a horse to be competitive and or win the Derby in his 4th career start. However, Mage and Kings Barnes, they are not Curlin, Big Brown, and Justify, and I think it would require a giant leap of faith to expect either one of these colts to move forward enough to emerge victorious in the Kentucky Derby. What's your take on these 2 lightly raced colts, David?
Yeah, Brad, I like the way that you framed that. Those 2 prior winners of the Kentucky Derby off just 3 starts, Big Brown and Justify, they had already earned the kinds of speed figures in their prep races that are typically required of winning the Kentucky Derby. That's not quite the case with Mage or Kings Barnes. Those buyers in the mid-90s that they earned for their final prep races, those are nice numbers, but it feels like they're each going to have to take a step forward if they're going to win a race like the Kentucky Derby. And it's a really tall order to take that step forward in just the 4th start of your career, facing off against 19 other runners. So it feels like it's a big ask for both Mage and Kings Barnes, but they're definitely talented runners.
2 very talented colts who are not fast enough quite yet. Maybe they will be a week from Saturday. Who knows who's going to win the Kentucky Derby in 2023? Who knows who's going to win the Kentucky Derby a year from now? David and I still have a few days to finalize our selections. This is a wrap for Derby Watch 2023. Thanks for watching. For David Aragona, I'm Brad Free, and we'll see you next time.